Welcome to the Art of Pivoting Your Life, breaking free and crafting change. I'm Michelle Carbone, a clinical hypnotherapist and intuitive coach. You can call in for guidance and coaching on making a pivot in your own life. The number to call is 516-623-1240. As always, we have plenty to talk about if nobody calls in, but we'd love to hear from you too.
Today, I'm doing frequently asked questions about hypnotherapy because, I love talking about hypnotherapy. I might be a little biased. So if you have questions, I would love for you to call in. But I have a list of questions I've received via email and on Facebook and my website. So let's get the ball rolling. And one common question is, can anyone be hypnotized? And according to Marissa Peer, who is my mentor in hypnotherapy, she's only had like two people, quote unquote, not be able to be hypnotized. And it's not so much that you're not able to be hypnotized, it's more of you resist going into that state in that environment. So if you just didn't trust who you were working with, or if you had really high anxiety about it, or things like that, then you may not be willing to go into that state. But the brainwave state that you go into in the practice that I do, which is rapid transformational therapy, you are going into alpha waves, and that is a state that you are in all the time, every day. If you've ever driven somewhere and you don't remember getting there, you were in alpha waves. Your subconscious was like, hey, I got you. And sometimes it doesn't got you, and you end up going somewhere that your subconscious thought you were going and you weren't going. And that's always interesting when that happens. And even if if you zone out, so to speak, that's generally going to be that you have gone into that a little bit more relaxed state of brainwave. So I like to tell my clients that, really you're just having a relaxed conversation with your eyes closed. And everyone can do that if they're willing. And that's something else that I do tell my clients. I don't, a lot of people associate hypnotherapy with like stop smoking. And I actually don't do a lot of stop smoking because most smokers don't want to quit. And if you don't want to do something, like, or stop something, change something, then, it's a little bit more difficult for that to work. And sometimes, obviously there's methods where you could force that in, but that's not something I do. You have to be willing to give up the habit that you are working with, or being willing to change. So when people will, another common question is like, oh, you're going to make me do something I don't want to do. And literally, I cannot do that. I'm not brainwashing you. I'm simply helping you achieve something you want, finding out what is the block to that thing. Um, so, it's very safe and easy. And there are cases where you would not want to do hypnotherapy. So, especially if someone has epilepsy or seizures that are not being controlled, there is a risk of, depending on the type of, epilepsy or what the triggers are, there is a chance of having a seizure during that relaxed state. So it's like, we don't want to risk that. And if somebody's had psychosis doing hypnotherapy, um, you risk causing further issues by doing regression and things like that. So when I work with my clients, it's, we always talk about any issues that they are currently dealing with so that we don't put them at risk. One other question I get a lot is just, what does it feel like to be hypnotized? And I've kind of touched on this, but really, it doesn't feel a lot different when you're in it. So what's I have found interesting is that you really don't feel a lot different than you normally do. If you're having a conversation with someone with your eyes closed, which, is not always common, but definitely happens. And you're just relaxed. But what happens, what I've noticed in my clients and myself, is that once you come out of that state, you notice the difference. And generally, of course, in the work that I do, and which does have, a lot of trauma work to it, you're feeling lighter, you're feeling just, feeling good, you're feeling happy, you're feeling relaxed, when you come out. And generally, a lot of people do have that a little bit of anxiety because they don't know what it is going to be like. I even worked with a client the other day on a second session, and she had her session several months ago, so she was a little bit nervous too because she kind of didn't remember what it was like. And then after the session, she felt great. So it was like amazing. Another question that we get is, how is hypnotherapy different from what you see with stage hypnosis? And I am not trained in stage hypnosis, so I actually love watching those because I find it very interesting. But stage hypnosis is about, letting your subconscious take over and do a, suggestible action. In order for that to work, what I do know is you need to be suggestible. You need to be highly suggestible. And there are things that I do in a session, what we call the bucket and balloon, where I tell you in one hand you have a really heavy, heavy bucket and it's making your arm go down. And in the other hand, you have a balloon and it's making your arm float right up. And it's so much fun to watch people do this. And that is akin to stage hypnosis, except that, we don't program in that action for very long. Um, it's really interesting. So, hypnotherapy is not doing anything you would do on stage, basically. Like, if I wanted to do that, I'd have to train in it. So, hypnotherapy, what we're focusing on is regression. We're focusing on going back to those moments when something somewhere happened, you had a belief about yourself or the world that formed because of what was happening around you. You had, maybe some emotions come up that have become dominant. And we look at those scenes, as we call them, because really what happened isn't the exact, like what you remember is you're remembering your perception of what happened. So it may not necessarily be what actually happened, but it doesn't matter because your mind thinks XYZ happened to you. And I'll give you an example of something that I've struggled with that's kind of silly, but um, when I was a child, very young, I apparently had a dream that my mom vacuumed over the babysitter's foot. And after that, I was terrified of vacuums unless I was the one vacuuming. I would, if my mom was vacuuming, I would jump on the couch and get my feet up. I was afraid of my feet being hurt by the vacuum. And to the extreme of, like, I was probably in seventh or eighth grade, and my best friend thought it would be funny to put me in a room full of vacuums and turn them all on as a joke. She didn't actually do it, thankfully. But I was like, dude, like that would have been terrible. I would have like had a panic attack. And it's because to my child mind, that really happened. And in reality, my mom's like, look, when we had a babysitter, I left the house. That's the point of a babysitter, is not to vacuum the babysitter's foot. So what we're doing is going back to those times. I've actually had clients who, we have worked with dreams before because this dream that they had is impacting them. And our mind doesn't necessarily know the difference between, reality and our dreams. And usually our dreams are crazy enough that when we wake up, we're like, oh my gosh, that was a dream. But sometimes it really, it's so real that we believe it. And some sort of a thought, a belief, uh, something is formed when these things happen, like my fear of vacuums. Luckily, I'm not scared of them anymore. But those things come up. So it might be you decided, I don't deserve anything good in my life, or I'm not good enough myself, or people always leave. There can be these abandonment wounds, all of those sort of things. And in hypnotherapy, we're also, in the method that I use, we are also talking to different parts of yourself. So we're talking to the part of yourself that's responsible for giving you anxiety or, making you procrastinate or whatever we're working with. Or even, I think I've mentioned this before, but, I've worked with a lot of cheerleaders and, they've had these tumbling blocks. And sometimes it is just this, a coach said something one time and it stuck. And because of that thing that coach said, or a parent or another student or whatever it is, they've literally formed a belief about themselves that was around that thing that they said. And they took that in, and that made them, have a fear of getting hurt, or it made them just hesitate and not think that they can do what they know that they can do with their bodies because they've done it before. So it's really interesting to work with these beliefs and these scenes from the past and work to reframe them, work to eliminate the meaning behind them and the beliefs that were formed at that time. So hypnotherapy is completely different than, a stage hypnosis. Um, and one question I get a lot is, what issues or conditions can hypnotherapy help with? And honestly, I would say almost anything, even physical issues. So I was recently at a training with Marissa Peer, and we had one of the fellow RTT therapists who had had a session for Marissa many years ago for a leg injury that was injured in a car accident. And part of the transformation portion of these sessions, is it's basically, we do what we call cell command healing, and that is where we are telling your mind to heal all of these cells in your body. Every single cell, is healthy and all of these things. And what was interesting about this particular case was that one of the things that was said was, your right leg matches your left leg because the left leg hadn't been injured, and, made them, telling them to match up basically and commanding the mind to do that. And what was so interesting and fascinates me and I love is that the woman was telling us one of her healthy leg had like a little bit of a dimple in the skin, like in the back, like just a little divot or whatever. And after she was healed eventually, and she, when I was listening to her recording, she actually had that same thing on her other leg. And I was like, of course she did, because we told your body to make the legs the same, right? Um, but hypnotherapy can help with so many things. So I've talked a little bit about sports blocks. Sports blocks are so interesting because in our mind, it's so powerful when we're doing a physical activity, believing we can do what we're going to do, that we trust our body, that we trust our muscle memory. All of these things come into play, and that we have that confidence to, in the instance of tumbling, that we can do that back handspring, or we can do the balance beam, or whatever it is. I took gymnastics when I was young, so that's, something I'm familiar with. And I actually experienced a sports block because I injured myself. And I was so upset because I just learned how to do back handsprings. And then I injured myself in what's called the pit, which is just a bunch of foam. And I just had to do that extra handspring, and then I injured myself. And as small as my injury was, it had a huge impact on the way I did gymnastics, and I actually had to quit. I had this huge block to doing even cartwheels, and I couldn't do back handsprings anymore, and they couldn't even hardly spot me because I was just terrified of getting injured again. And I didn't have hypnotherapy to help me with that, so I quit. um, but I work a lot with different beliefs that people struggle with. So it may be because of the women that I work with that are struggling from traumatic relationships, a lot of what they're dealing with is trusting themselves, because part of being in a traumatic relationship is losing your self trust, especially if you're dealing with like gaslighting. And it's so interesting to see the change in my clients after a session because, they can speak up for themselves when they trust themselves. They'll listen to what they want to do. The people pleasing kind of thing is greatly reduced or eliminated altogether eventually, with doing the work. I work a lot with anxiety. Obviously a lot of people suffer from anxiety these days, and the society that we live in is kind of an anxious inducing place, and figuring out why someone is having anxiety, a lot of times it's interesting. It comes from a protection. The anxiety is coming up as a protection from the mind to help them cope with other things. So it's like, maybe a fear of failure. So you get this anxiety that come up that keeps you from even trying. So there's a lot of times secondary gains with issues. Um, and I work a lot with all different kinds of things, everything from not feeling good enough to physical issues. I've done sessions on allergies, because what's interesting is when things come up when you're little. Let's say that there's two kids in the family, mom and dad, and one of the kids is ill and gets more attention. So maybe the other child feels neglected and goes, oh, okay. And the mind is the subconscious. It's not a conscious decision from the child, but the subconscious is like, ooh, look, my sibling's getting all this attention because they're sick. So I'm going to get sick too, or I'm going to have this other issue come up. I'm going to need more help so that I get some attention as well, because, children need attention. So we always deal with what emerges in a session, and I will never tell a client why they have the issue they have. What I do is hold their hand while we go through their subconscious mind and find out why. Why is this happening? What's going on? So it's just so, so, so interesting. Um, One question I've seen is, can I get stuck in a hypnotic state? And I can't, there's a movie with Jack Black where he meets Tony Robbins and sort of has a, what's it called? Shallow Hal. Great movie if you haven't seen it. Great message. But what's interesting is some people might think that he was kind of stuck in this hypnotic state that Tony put him into. But it's not really how that works. I wish we could do actually what Tony did in real life. That would be great. Um, but you cannot get stuck in that state. I was talking before, you go into that state all of the time, like when you're driving. That's actually the first stage of sleep. So the alpha waves are that first different brain wave that you're going into as you're falling asleep. So it's like, it's amazing. It's just this relaxed state, and we've all experienced it. When you're falling asleep, you're awake, but you're not awake, and you're not asleep, and you're kind of in this in between place. And that's where we're taking you. So it's very, very simple and easy to get you into that state because it's natural for your brain to go into alpha waves. You can even find videos on YouTube that take you into alpha waves, and different, music tracks and things, like with binaural beats. There are some of those that have like alpha or theta. That's what they're talking about. So no, you cannot get stuck in that state. So don't worry. And I've even had clients who, sometimes when our mind is not ready for us to see something, or it thinks we're not ready, it will actually give us physical symptoms. And so I've seen a lot of different things, but I had one client who just woke up and was like, oh, I don't, I'm not feeling well, like a little nauseous. I'm like, no problem. They were able to just open their eyes and like be awake, even though I didn't count them back to their full awareness or anything like that. So it's very safe because it's a natural state for our minds to get to, our brains to be in, and it's also something that you can honestly, even though in the suggestions at the start of the session I tell you you can't open your eyes, you really can't. um, and So it's really interesting. So yeah, you cannot get stuck in that state, so you don't have to worry about that. Um, and one question I've had is hypnotherapy suitable for children? And I would say yes, depending on what we're dealing with. I have worked with as young as 14, and when you're under 10, a session is conducted very differently because really they don't have that much of a past. They're still actually forming these different parts of themselves. So, with a younger child, really what you're doing is using language they can understand if you work with children that young, which would not I'm not somebody that would work with someone that young. I think teenagers is young enough for me. But using like analogies, like we saw a session with a little girl who they were just trying to get her to stop biting her nails. So, talking about like, oh, your nails are pretty like a princess, and, that sort of thing, because she's probably like 4 years old. So, just making a recording, having that suggestion put in while they're in that relaxed state, because in children that young are almost always they're like in that absorbing state, and that's why children constantly ask us why and try to figure things out and how the world works, because they are absorbing that and creating those subconscious programs of how to be in the world. So it's interesting to work with children, but that's not something that, that young, it's not something I do. I would say like 12 and older is kind of where I'm at. Um, Someone asked me about how to prepare for a hypnotherapy session, and really, um, there's nothing you really need to do to prepare. With my clients, we do actually 3 sessions as part of what I do, and the first is the intake. So preparing for intake is good in that I'm going to ask you questions about what you want. So thinking about what does my life look like without anxiety, for instance, is a great place to start. So maybe I walk into rooms confidently if I have social anxiety. Maybe I, can confidently go to the doctor, and I can go to the store and I feel comfortable and I feel happy that I'm there and able to get my errands done, or, whatever it is. Creating that visual of what life looks like. I actually had one very interesting client where we did a money block session. So, finding money blocks is really interesting, I think, because we find those beliefs that have been instilled in us by, maybe our parents or society or whatever. So it's really, really interesting to get rid of a money block. So with her, I'm like, what does it feel like? What does this money block feel like? And they said, I feel like I'm in one of those money machines and all the money is right there and I just can't grab it. And so we used that and changed it to shift how it felt, so that she's in this money machine box or whatever, where you're grabbing all the flying money, and that she's catching it. It's all sticking to her. And, that was a very effective visual for her because she already had associated something with that environment. So it was really, really a great transformation because we used what was in her mind. So that's the only thing to prepare for, at least a session with me, is just thinking about what does life look like? Is there a way I want life to feel without this issue? Are there things I'm doing, seeing, feeling, smelling, whatever it is, and using that in the transformation? It's an amazing way to really um, change what's happening in your mind, because our minds want to give us what we want. Like, that's the bottom line. That's what they're here for. But the only way our minds know what we want is by the words that we say in our mind and the pictures that we create in our mind. And that's why visualizations are so effective, because we're giving our mind the words, we're giving our mind the pictures and saying, this is what I want. So I try to always put in some sort of visualization because I know how effective it is. And it's just an amazing way to really get what you want. And I do make just recordings. And I worked with someone who was going to a big conference. And so we were working on the confidence that she had and how she approached people and like how she felt when she was talking to people. And, even just doing a recording and customizing it for her mind was very effective. She was able to go to this conference, she reported to me after, and, had a much better experience than she would have had because she had prepared her mind for like, hey, I'm at this conference. This is what I want to see. This is what I want to do. And it's just, um, it's an amazing thing. Um, and one person asked me if they need to believe in hypnotherapy for it to work. And that's kind of a interesting question. I would say it's definitely more effective if you're willing and believe that it works, because part of what we're working with is beliefs. And that's, so if you have a belief that it's not going to work, then guess what? It's not going to work, because we need to believe that our mind can change. So I think you can create change if somebody doesn't believe in it, but whether the change is long term or not is another story, because there's definitely times I think when if you're not letting go of that kind of a belief and you're like, oh, this doesn't work, nothing works for me, then yeah, it's not going to work, because our thoughts again are creating our reality, and our mind's giving us what we want, which is for this to not work. So I do think believing it is definitely a piece that if someone came to me and said, I don't believe in it, then I would definitely include in that session something around working with their belief that it doesn't work, so that we can clear that out to make the session more effective for them, because believing it can work will definitely create this environment where it's going to work, and work much better. Um, so working with your thoughts and your beliefs is really, really important when you're trying to create change in your life. And I'm basically out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. And if anybody wants to reach out with questions or information on hypnotherapy or coaching, you can reach me at zenmindmichelle.com, which is ZenMindMichelle.com. And my phone number, email address, all that stuff is on my website. And you'll find me at Zen My Michelle on Instagram and Facebook. So, everyone, I hope you have a great night, and we'll see you next week.